and welcome to episode 2480 of Effectively Wild, a FanGraphs baseball podcast brought to you by our Patreon supporters. I'm Meg Rowley of FanGraphs, and I am joined by Ben Lindbergh of The Ringer. Ben, how are you?
Doing well, but not nearly as well as the Philadelphia Phillies. Now, I know we've had this kind of conversation before, quite possibly when the Phillies replaced Joe Girardi with Rob Thomson and their fortunes changed. But these Phillies are 15-4 since firing Rob Thomson. That's the best record in baseball over that span. And it's not a bunch of fluky one-run wins or extra inning wins. They have the second best run differential over that period, too, trailing only the Brewers.
Wow.
So what are we to make of this? As rational, sabermetrically minded observers, must we simply say regression and small sample, or they were bound to do better anyway, or must we bow before Mattingly magic?
I mean, look, I don't feel the need to denigrate Don Mattingly. I'm not here to blow up his spot. I'm not here to give him a hard time, but I feel like it's a good baseball team that wasn't playing particularly well. Seems like they were sort of due to play better, and they had some guys who were hurt who got healthy again, and you know, they have
Zach
Wheeler.
Wheeler's healthy and pitching well. Good job, Donnie.
Yeah, he looks more and more like himself with every start, and they have Duran back, and like Harper's playing well again. We already talked about that at one point. Schwarber keeps scalding the baseball.
20 dingers.
Yeah, if they can just get Trey Turner going, you're going to be cooking with gas over there. So I think that it's mostly this was a better baseball team than they were playing as. And I think that there was an understanding at the time of Rob Thompson's dismissal that they were kind of shaking it up for the sake of doing that. And that it wasn't likely to be all that different under Don Mattingly. And I think so far that has proven to be true. Now, they're playing better. They're over 500 as we are recording on Monday before games start. They are still 8 games out of first place in the East. But weren't they like 15 out at one point or some bit of nonsense? You know, so things have improved in a marked way, and that's really all you can hope for.
Yes, and their playoff odds are back up to 65%. And even if Atlanta hasn't exactly slowed down, obviously things are looking quite a bit better for the Phillies from a wild card perspective. They're tied with the Pirates, 3.5 games out of the third NL wild card. So at this rate, they'll have claimed that spot perhaps by the end of the week. But are we so dogmatic as to maintain, though, that the firing made no difference, that they would have had the same record over that span? Because I'm with you. Of course, this team was going to be better one way or another. And it's not even as if Rob Thomson seemed to be some sort of pariah or something, that anyone was particularly complaining about Rob Thomson or blaming him, holding him responsible for anything. It was just, well, we got to throw somebody overboard.
Right.
So are we still to say, though, even accepting that this was a good team, that it had the foundations of a playoff favorite, and that its fortunes were destined to improve, would we still take that to the extreme of saying, if they had not fired Rob Thomson, if Don Mattingly had remained the bench coach, they had not rocked this boat, which was taking on water, they would have gone 15-4 anyway? Would you take it to that extreme of saying that things would have played out exactly as well for the Phillies if they had stayed the course?
No. I mean, I try not to be especially dogmatic about things just generally. This is a rather thin needle that I'm going to try to thread here. I don't want to say that there was a lack of urgency on the part of the Phillies players prior to his firing. I do think that when you are at the point in your season where the front office feels the need to make a performative managerial firing, and it is, you know, not yet May, you maybe sit there and go, oh gosh, I got to get my ass in gear here a little bit. I'm sure there's some of that. I haven't watched every single one of those games, so I can't really speak to whether there were any moments where, you know, we had a Mattingly stroke of genius that, you know, that Rob would have fumbled. But I suspect that much more of it is attributable to the team simply just kind of playing much more like their true talent level than anything else. But, I guess one thing you can say is sort of a roundabout way of being complimentary to Don is that Mattingly at least didn't lose the clubhouse, right? There wasn't some rift that formed as a result of moving on from a skipper they liked and then Mattingly's elevated. The counterfactual that I'm actually the most interested in, which we obviously can't know the answer to, is how different would it have gone, if at all, if they had succeeded in hiring Cora? That's the alternate reality that I would be fascinated by, because I can imagine a circumstance where that goes worse, where there's a bristling and you're breaking in a new guy and it's well, why are you bringing in this guy who got canned from his job? Why can't we just keep our guy we know and like? So that one I would have been fascinated by to see how that would have gone. But I don't know. I think that's pretty good baseball team. They have some good guys. I think it's mostly just Zach Wheeler's back and looking more and more like himself all the time. So
yeah, and this has not been a particularly tough stretch of schedule for the Phillies. It was Giants, Marlins for 4 games, A's, Rockies, Red Sox, Pirates. So
got to talk differently about the A's than you're accustomed to, Ben. You got to course correct on that.
Oh, yeah. I'm bullish about the A's, but even so, these are not the best teams that they've been playing, and they'd had a fairly tough schedule going into the firing. And yeah, it's not as if, even if you think that in the specific case it might have made some difference, obviously it's not a panacea in all cases. The Red Sox are 9-10 post-Cora, which is an improvement, but not a noteworthy one, really. But we talked about Dan Szymborski's research and about how, on the whole, over the course of 20 years and 40 firings, teams played precisely to their expectations, their projections at the time of the firing. And Neil Payne also looked at this on his Substack, and he seemed to find a bit of a boost, at least early after a managerial change where teams outplayed their previous performance at least. Obviously, you're going to outplay your previous performance just because you probably underperformed if your manager is getting the axe. But even though I am more toward the side of managers don't matter all that much in most cases, and I wouldn't say that Rob Thomson was clearly the outlier, the unusual case where he actually was tanking the team's fortunes, I guess I'd still say that when you have this sort of run of success, which obviously wasn't expected or projected, that if you did anything differently, it almost would have to go worse.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know exactly how or why, but it's kind of 15-4. That's about a best case scenario.
Right.
And so if you messed with that success, then probably it's all downhill from there. And so I don't know exactly. It would be hard to tie it to, okay, this guy got a hit in this game because he was inspired by Don Mattingly being his manager, or a fire was lit under him because Rob Thomson was deemed expendable and now who's next or something. So it would be really hard to connect the dots, but in sort of a butterfly effect way, I guess I might say that if they had not done that, my expectation would be that they would have had a slightly worse record, perhaps, if they had just stayed the course. But it's a long season, and it's quite possible that they will, on the whole, from here on out, they will mostly play to projections. I wouldn't be surprised if, when the dust settles and it's all said and done, we look at what Zip said on the day they made the managerial change and what their actual record ends up being, and find that it's not too far apart.
I think that that's right. Maybe they wanted to do it for Rob. Maybe they felt like we should do it for Rob. He lost his job kind of on. It must be a strange feeling to be a player and correctly read the situation as, we were playing we were playing like such a dog shit that this guy lost his job even though he wasn't really at fault for anything that was happening. That has to feel bad. I would feel compelled to do better for the skipper, as it were.
Well, the Mets did not make a change. Carlos Mendoza is still their manager, and they are since the Phillies fired Thomson, the Mets are 11-7. So things have ticked up a bit for them, though the injury issues, of course, have continued. It's been rough. They get one guy back, they lose another guy. Clay Holmes now done for months, seemingly, after having his leg fractured by that menace, Spencer Jones. He hits the ball too hard and sometimes at people. And Holmes, just in the latest example of superhuman pain tolerance or the power of adrenaline or whatever it is, just he kept pitching for a while. I mean, I know not every fracture is like created equal, obviously,
Right.
It's not necessarily like your femur sticking through your skin or something here. Maybe it's just a sorry,
with you lately. Okay. Like,
sorry. It's all the loose bodies that have been floating around. It's getting to me. Now it's like Snell's got the loose bodies. We'll see if he has a Snell scope or not. But yeah, sorry if I've been somewhat cavalier with my descriptions I tend not to be squeamish about these things, and so I may just not anticipate what sort of reaction this will spark. I'm sorry. Clay Holmes is hurt is the point.
Yes.
So, but things are looking up, relatively speaking, for the Mets. And just the first of a few follow-ups here, the Mets did have a big comeback late inning win and a walk-off win against the Yankees on Sunday. And this is something that had come up on episode 2458 when we fielded a question about extended streaks of not coming back to win a game that you were trailing after 8 innings. And we got a question about that because the Mets at that time, they hadn't done that. They had something like a 70-game losing streak when trailing after 8 innings, and someone asked us if this was a record. And by we, I mean Michael Mountain, determined that no, it was not nearly a record, and that the record seemed to be the White Sox having lost 205 consecutive games when trailing after 8 from late 2023 and then into early 25. So no, it wasn't that noteworthy, but it still felt noteworthy for Mets fans. And it was the longest active streak in the majors of failing to mount a come-from-behind victory when trailing after 8. So finally, they snapped that streak. So it was 91 consecutive games, I believe, that they had lost in that situation. And then Tyrone Taylor said, not 92. That's it. I'm drawing the line right here. So good for the Mets, a big win for them, and they haven't had that many. So this was, I think, the last time they had won such a game in the regular season since September 30th, 2024. That was when they beat the Braves to clinch that playoff appearance at the very end of the season. And then if you include the postseason, it happened in the wild card series immediately after that when Pete Alonso hit the homer off of Devin Williams. But yeah, it had been far too long for Mets fans' taste. And who knows, maybe that will motivate them.
Yeah, maybe, I think they got some reasonably good news as it pertains to Francisco Lindor and his timetable to return. So maybe they'll also be on the come up. It's so funny because we should apply the same sort of analysis to their club in terms of expecting that a team that is more talented than they have played so far will play sort of closer to their true talent level. And that's not to say that like every move they made this offseason was great, or that I don't know what's wrong with Bo Bichette. Can't figure that one out. He's not being bad in the ways that I would expect his game to collapse. So that part of it is flummoxing to me, but they should be better. And that's the approach we should take. And I don't believe in magic, but I think I do believe in curses, at least on a limited baseball basis, and more so with the Mets than others. So don't know what to make of that.
I also have an update about a streak pertaining to former Met and current Oriole Rico Garcia.
Yes.
Because, sadly, his streak was snapped. We didn't jinx him. Kevin Brown did. So I'll play a quick clip from the Orioles broadcast. You'll hear Kevin Brown and his broadcast partner, Ben McDonald, and this will be edited and abridged and combined, but you can hear Kevin Brown bringing up the 0 BABIP streak that Garcia had going and then calling the end of it.
Rico did not allow a hit for the first 10 games of the season. In the 11th, Kansas City's Michael Massey homered. He is now not allowed a hit in 8 consecutive games. The league is 1 for 57 against Garcia. Just unfathomable number.
Look at that.
He dumps in a curveball strike.
There's no pattern to what he's doing. You always got to respect 95 and 96 because he's got that in his back pocket. But the all-speed stuff has been outstanding.
There is one pattern.
Well, yeah, let's hope that pattern continues, too.
Here's an 0-2. A base hit. A miracle. That is the first hit against Rico Garcia in the field of play this year.
So it was Garcia on Garcia crime. It was Luis Garcia Jr. who ended this, and this was not a seeing eye single or anything like that. He earned that hit. And Rico Garcia's streak of not allowing a hit on a ball in play ends at 21 2/3 innings, dating back to last season. So he did set the record to start a season, but he will have to settle for a tie for second longest streak all time with the well-known Johnny Vandermeer. So Rico Garcia just did what Johnny Vandermeer did, essentially, although he did obviously allow the home run in the midst of his streak. But he tied Vandermeer and trails only the all-time leader, Dennis Eckersley, who had just 2 2/3 innings more. So he was almost there. He almost made it, but no slouch to be second, and no one would have ever guessed that he would have been the one to do that. But he's been nasty. It's partly just BABIP luck, but also he's been good. He's been like a real live late inning arm, missing tons of bats, getting whiffs, nasty movement, good control. He looks like quite a find for the Orioles at the back of that bullpen.
Sometimes guys emerge, you know?
And sometimes guys emerge after their Mets, but not while they're Mets, much to the dismay of Mets fans. But again, the bullpen hasn't been the biggest problem for these Mets. And one more follow-up on a conversation that we had earlier this season. On episode 2463, we entertained the suggestion that maybe a team should consider essentially sacrificing a weak hitter to try to get an opposing pitcher ejected by having the hitter get plunked, let's say, and essentially flop, but in the most aggressive way possible, to take it personally, to charge the mound, because we found that even when a hitter charges the mound and a pitcher basically just puts up his dukes in self-defense, he's liable to get ejected. Even if he's not instigating it or throwing a haymaker or anything, you could get him run. And we talked about whether this would work and whether it would be underhanded and who might be a good candidate to go through with this. And then none other than a broadcaster we have discussed a few times already this season, John Kruk. Great minds. He had the same idea. And I will play a quick clip of him. This is from Sunday's Phillies-Pirates game.
Oh, man, that got him good.
It did. So he's hit by a pitch.
I mean, if you want to get Skeens out of the game, charge him out, right? No, you didn't mean this on purpose, but we got to get your ass out of the game.
I am just so delighted that some part of John Kruk's beautiful mind overlaps with ours.
Yes.
I am terrified by that. You know, I do want to acknowledge the part of me that feels the deep concern, but mostly it's just a profound sense of flattery and gratitude that we could connect, you know, through space and time and arrive at a similar conversation. It's funny because dispositionally, I want to be clear, I don't think of Adolis Garcia as like a particularly like aggressive guy. He's definitely a demonstrative guy when things are going well for him, right? We've seen him really bat flip, but I don't read him as like a particularly like aggressive dude. Maybe I'm missing something, but that's not. But here's the thing. you got to deal with those arms, you know. Sure, he's like a weak hitter within that lineup. He you know, we talked about this when he was acquired, and really it's just you want any kind of an upgrade with the bat and really any kind of an upgrade with the defense, and that's what you're getting with Adolis. But he looks like someone who could really wreck you because he's just his arms. I mean, look, we know Kruk appreciates his physique. We know he does. He wants to see him oiled up in wrestling. Like, we know that about John.
I'd like to see him and Garcia on a oiled up and flexing after a good workout.
Garcia might have him this year.
Boy, he's a big man.
Regardless of the pitcher on the mound, I don't think this is specific to Skeens or anything, but I do think it would give you pause about your desire to rumble, because it's like, now, Skeens, as no less a luminary than Michael Baumann has noted, is built like the USS Nimitz. So maybe he's not going to be intimidated by Adolis because he's, you know, himself quite an intimidating figure. But I wonder if like the vibe of it is a little bit wrong, where you have a pause that you must entertain to be like, do I really want to fight with this guy? Like, does that now, you know, he's got 6 inches on Adolis. So maybe he's like, arms or no, I don't care. Let's go. But maybe not. Maybe it's not quite the right, but you would inspire him to fight more. So maybe it is the right thing, right? Because this was the delicate balance that we noted when we were talking about this. Like, you can't just have some little shrimp of a guy do this, because the pitcher's going to be like, that's adorable. What are you getting up to there, buddy? You a little bit tired or something? Like, it has that sort of energy. And then if it's a really big hulking dude, well, then it's like, well, what if they actually fight? Then you have real risk of injury. So you have to sort of thread the needle. So maybe Garcia is the right candidate for this, both in terms of his offensive profile and also the fact that he's like big enough as a physical presence to like think that he means it and could do some damage, but is relative to Skeens shorter enough, and Skeens is himself robust enough that it would, you know, it wouldn't come to real blows. But also, I think that Paul Skeens is aware of how important it is that he be on the field for the Pirates as much as possible. He probably wants to pitch in the 9th inning.
Yeah, although in that specific case, the Phillies did not need to resort to trickery. They beat Paul Skeens fair and square.
Wow.
He had a fairly rough outing. They touched him for 5 runs in 5 innings. So that's one way to beat him. Just hit him hard instead of getting him ejected from the game. Yeah, instead of, or at least threatening to. So yes, it is heartening, also somewhat disturbing that John Kruk had the same idea that we considered Uneffectively Wild. Maybe he's a listener. Who knows? If so, hi, Krucker. But
I am skeptical.
I don't see him as a podcast person.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think it's anything about us. I think
not
it's
an aversion to Effectively Wild specifically.
Podcasts.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I can't imagine him being like, I'm going to be a podcast guy. I don't.
Yeah.
I think that I say this to his credit, because wouldn't we all benefit from this perspective? But my sense is that John Kruk views his cell phone as a phone, and that's all. You raised an issue on our most recent Patreon episode that you're flummoxed by all of the apps on phones and desktops, for that matter, sort of looking similar, and it can be a little bit discombobulating when you're trying to find something specific because all the apps are blue. I bet that John Kruk has like 2 apps on his phone. I bet that John Kruk I bet one of them is a banking app. Are we
counting the phone app?
We're not counting the phone
text message app.
Yeah, I bet he can text. I bet he can receive email, but never checks it on his phone. He strikes me as someone who's like, well, I got to look at email on my computer because that's where you look at email. It's sort of like how millennials can't book flights on their phones. That's true. What do you want to be able to see the big screen?
I'd prefer more real estate. Sure.
He doesn't strike me as a podcast guy, and God bless him.
He has appeared on the odd podcast, I believe. It's hard not to if you're a member of the media. But as far as I know, he hasn't hosted one, and I don't know anything about his podcast consumption habits. But we can guess, perhaps. So, yes, those are important updates for all of us. And I'm especially happy for the Mets that they pulled that one out, because on Saturday, the day before that big comeback victory, Joe Davis had debuted a call. I'm sure you heard the oh no, the Mets call that Joe Davis gave us all for posterity. This was a Carson Bench dropped fly ball. He kind of had a Aaron Judge clanked off the mitt sort of incident. And Joe Davis, well, I'll play the clip.
Bellinger flies the first one to right center field. Bench drops the ball. Oh, no, the Mets.
And I love that he extrapolated just from Bench dropping a ball to, oh no, the Mets. Like it was this very just all-encompassing. This was not just one player making a mistake that ultimately proved not to be that costly. The Mets were winning that game and they went on to win that game. But it was just so redolent of the Mets, so emblematic of the Mets, that all he could think in that moment was, oh no, Mets. Oh no, the Mets.
Yeah, they do inspire you to sort of extrapolate out from any individual moment of failure to sort of indict the whole franchise. In a way, I mean, I'm sure it's not a relief to any of the players on the team, because I bet they wish that things were just in a better spot for them than they are. But I wonder if it's freeing in a way. It's like, Carson Bench, that's not you failing. That's the Mets, man. Like, what do you expect? You're on the Mets.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that call will echo through the ages. We can trot out, oh no, the Mets whenever it's appropriate, which it so often is.
I will say there is a certain amount of risk to that decision on Joe Davis's part, because do I imagine that the Mets are going to be the Dodgers' biggest problem come October? I submit to you that they will not be, even when they start playing in a way that is more in keeping with the actual skill on that roster. But it's a bold move as an announcer to sort of give bulletin board material to a potential rival. You know what I mean? Because it's one thing if it's a player, but you're just, I mean, no offense to Joe Davis, I think he's a good announcer, but you're just some guy, you know, you're not involved in the production on the field. That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to describe it in a good, entertaining way and help fans understand it. But to potentially put something on a bulletin board in an opposing clubhouse, that's bold. I think there's the potential for backfire there. Now, the Mets have to do a lot better than they have for it to matter at all. Yes. You know, we sit here and talk about the Phillies being 8 out, 11.5 for the Mets, and they're 20-26. So, you know.
And you can't defend that specific play. It's not as if that wasn't an oh no moment.
Oh, no.
It's just that
Mets.
Other Mets might have looked around and said, I didn't do it.
Right.
Oh no, Carson Bench maybe, but what did I have to do? How am I getting lumped in with this mistake?
I suppose, but if I'm a guy on the Mets right now, I'm not sitting there being like, how dare you impugn my honor? It's like, you don't end up 20-26 due to one guy. So, you know, everyone is shouldering at least some of that blame, except for maybe Nolan McLean.
Well, speaking of failure on the field, we got a question from Patreon supporter Jeff that I thought I'd throw out to you and the audience for discussion. Sure. So Jeff says, episode 2479 had a stat blast about pinch runners getting immediately picked off. Ben suggested that it was the most embarrassing thing that can happen to a player on a baseball field. You know, because you had one job, right? Yeah. You were brought in to do the running. Someone else earned his way on base, and then you took his place, and your job was maybe to advance a base, but primarily not to be out, and you couldn't do that. So especially if it was like the Sam Haggerty case from last week where he got picked off immediately, that's pretty embarrassing. So Jeff says, that got me thinking about other scenarios in which a player is brought in to do one job and instantly does a bad job. A pinch hitter weakly popping out on the first pitch. A defensive replacement making an error on the first ball to them. A reliever giving up a hit on their first pitch. Could we rank these in worseness? A couple of thoughts. One is leverage. In today's game, with universal DH and small benches, pinch hitters, runners, and defensive replacements seem more likely to happen later in the game with potentially higher stakes. Relievers, on the other hand, come in earlier, though not necessarily in lower leverage. Another thought is redemption. Pinch hitters and runners might get only one shot in that game. A reliever might stick around for 2 more batters. A defensive replacement generally stays in the rest of the game with potentially more opportunities to make up for that mistake. So can anything compare to or surpass the pinch runner who immediately gets subjected to a 2 plan?
I kind of don't know that I think there is. Like, let's say you're a reliever and you come in and the bases are juiced and you immediately give up a home run. Well, that feels really bad, right? Your job was to get out of the jam, to help get out of the jam. But also, you didn't put those guys on base. You know, that's not your fault. You're just, you're there to try to clean up somebody else's mess. And if you don't do a satisfactory job of it, well, don't spill stuff on the carpet then. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's not good, to be clear. And it feels really bad, but it's, I think, of a different category. Now, when a pinch hitter comes in, their optimal approach at the plate is going to be at least somewhat dependent on what the pitcher in question is doing. I like it. It feels better to me to see a pitch, you know? I think the exception to the pinch hitter being less bad is if you come in to pinch hit and the pitcher in question does not have it that night and they are scattershot and you immediately go up there swinging, I get very annoyed by that. It's see a pitch. Make him show you that he can throw you a strike, my guy. Why are you swinging away? Stop swinging away. Make him throw you a strike.
But what if the pitcher is thinking that? Well, he's going to take one here, and then he just throws you a meatball down the middle.
Well, you got to react to the pitch you have too. But I'm just saying, sometimes you'll see a guy come in and he'll flail at a pitch that is not a strike, and he weakly grounds out. And you're like, what was that about?
Yeah,
he walked the 2 guys prior to you, make him throw you a strike. Why are you helping him out? So that's very frustrating.
Yeah.
Can you tell I watch the Mariners a lot? But the pinch running, it's just, you are being selected for such a specific skill. You gotta hold it together, man.
Yeah.
And it's especially embarrassing because it's not like you never see guys get legitimately picked off or thrown out on the base paths, but it does feel like a skill that you should have dialed in better. You know what I mean? Most guys don't get picked off. Most guys, if they're out there to run, they have the skill to do that in a way that is reasonable. So I find it very flummoxing.
Yes. Well, I have some data on this specific situation because at the end of last week's last episode, I threw out a question for people to ponder, which was, do you think that the pickoff rate is higher for pinch runners or non-pinch runners? Because you might be inclined to think pinch runners are probably better runners, and therefore they would be picked off less often. Then again, pitchers and catchers are highly aware that they're better runners. And so they're going to be throwing over there and checking up on them and trying to keep them close. And also the situation when a pinch runner comes in, maybe they are often expected to be trying to take that base, swipe that bag. So they're taking extra risks. They're taking longer leads. So I asked Michael Mountain if he could determine who has a higher pickoff rate, pinch runners or non-pinch runners. So I do have an answer now, and he filtered the time range to 1951 through 2025. 51 is when MLB first started tracking caught stealing officially. So the overall pickoff success rate is 0.49%. So 0.49% of opportunities someone is picked off. That's 4.4 million opportunities. And I think that was when a base is open ahead of you, essentially. So it's 0.49% overall, but the pickoff success rate against pitch runners specifically is 0.6%. 0.6 higher than 0.49. And that's in 89,000 or so opportunities. So
pinch runners get picked off more, but
yes, they get picked off more.
Do we think that part of the explanation for that is that pinch runners are brought in with the expectation that they might be both speedier and able to advance the base, and so they are taking like a larger lead, and so are more like that? That's the explanation we would attribute that to, right?
Yes, I think so. And they're just going to be drawing more scrutiny. And Michael sliced and diced this a bit more to look at what happens with stolen base threats specifically, guys who have some wheels. So against players with 10 or more stolen base attempts that season who are not pinch running, the pickoff success rate, and really it depends on whose perspective you're considering the pickoff from. I guess this would be from the defense's perspective, but 0.72% in about 2 million opportunities. So that's against the stolen base threats. So that's the highest yet. The overall 0.49, pinch runners 0.6, but the stolen base threats who are not pinch runners, 0.72%, whereas the pickoff success rates against non-stolen base threats, guys who had fewer than 10 stolen base attempts that season, who were not pinch running, their pickoff success rate was only 0.28% in about 2.3 million opportunities. So even if we limit it to non-pinch runners, the guys who are more liable to take off, they have a much higher rate of being picked off. And so I think we can say that the pinch runners having the higher rate is because pinch runners have a disproportionately high percentage of runners who are stolen base threats, or, there's a real risk that they're going to go. So as Michael says, without controlling for how costly a pickoff would be given the game state, which is almost certainly not uniform across those samples and which should theoretically impact both how determined a pitcher is to try it, as well as how careful a runner is in avoiding it, pinch runners overall are more successful at avoiding being picked off than eager stolen base attempters who reach base of their own accord, who are not pinch runners. So yeah, it's just a skewed sample sort of thing. The pinch runners, they're guys who can go in situations when maybe they're expected to go, and thus the defense is vigilant. So that is the answer to that question. But it's not necessarily the answer to the question of what's more embarrassing. So maybe that minimizes the embarrassment a bit, because often a pinch runner is going to be taking a bit more risks. And it's not that they really have one job, which is not to get thrown out. That's easy enough. If all you had to worry about was not getting thrown out, then you could just stand on the base. You wouldn't take a lead at all. You couldn't possibly be tagged out if you maintain contact at all times. But they're probably taking longer leads, and maybe they've got the green light. Maybe they were even instructed to go. So now they still should not get picked off if possible, but still, it's an unusual situation. But I still think it's pretty embarrassing when you are inserted into that spot. And obviously it depends on the specifics, and pickoffs can, sometimes it can be scored a pickoff, but you're actually going. And sometimes it's just, you misread the move and you dive back too slowly, or whatever it is. You get caught napping, or you're just appropriately taking a risk. Who knows?
We have often made the case, and we are hardly alone in this, that there is a good case to be made that runners should be going more often than they are, that there's a lack of aggressiveness that is sometimes to their detriment. Sometimes you need to force the defense to make the good play. You don't want to nap or be caught napping. It's funny that we say that. It's so rude. It's a deeply insulting thing, really. It's not just, oh, you made a mistake. It's you were fully neglecting your responsibilities. Do you think it's worse to be caught napping or to forget how many outs there are?
That's another quite embarrassing thing.
That actually might be the worst one now that I think about it. Forgetting how many outs there are. And it's true. It's a fun one because it's bad on either side of the ball, You don't want to be goofing around with how many outs there are if you're the fielding team or, you're on offense.
It's not always costly to forget. Sometimes you just have a brain fart. But when it is,
infuriating.
Yes, that's true.
Because you're sitting at home, and granted, you're being reminded constantly how many outs there are because it's sitting there on the scorebook. But you know how many outs there are. You're very aware of how many outs there are. You're sitting there always remember, and you're like, isn't one of your primary jobs to know how many outs there are so that you don't. I think that's actually the worst one. When it costs you. When it doesn't, then you feel like you've brushed up against a ghost.
Yeah, that is a strong contender because I think
that sucks when that
there
happens.
has to be an element of unforced error, and especially if it's a mental error, because a reliever coming in and giving up a hit, that's not embarrassing. It might be annoying. It's disappointing, but it's not. It happens too often for it really to be embarrassing.
And it isn't even necessarily an indication that you threw a bad pitch. Sometimes you got to hand it to the guy, right?
Yes.
Sometimes the guy just, he gets up there and he hits it true.
Yeah, as the saying goes, the other guy drives a big car too, or lives in a big house too, or I guess I don't know what the saying is. Maybe there are multiple versions of that saying.
What saying are you trying to invoke there? I don't even know.
But yeah, all these guys are good. So if you get beaten on a particular pitch, that's not that big a deal. If someone, if you pinch hit for someone and it's like, oh, here comes the big bat, and then you pop up on your first pitch or something, that's mildly embarrassing, maybe just because you were inserted for your hitting prowess, and probably the guy you pinch hit for is thinking, well, I could have done that, and it's kind of like Casey at the bat comes up and just goes down swinging or something. Then maybe that's a bit embarrassing, but it's not that embarrassing because hitting is hard. So, odds are you're going to make an out, right? Unless you're Barry Bonds, basically. So, if you make a weak out and it's on the first pitch or something, maybe that's worse, but it's not that bad. And even a pitcher, the odds are more in your favor in any particular plate appearance, but it's not like the percentage that we're talking about with getting picked off as a pinch runner, where it's sub 1% of the time opportunities that happens. So the only one I can think of other than what we've talked about, I guess, when you can't throw strikes, that's pretty bad, because at a certain point it does become probably the hitter's taking, like if you've walked a couple guys and it's 3-0 or something, that's an invitation to just lob one in there. And if you still can't throw, especially just walking someone on 4 pitches, of course it kind of goes beyond embarrassing into uncomfortable at times.
Right, you feel bad for the guy.
Yeah, or when it verges on yips sort of situation. Depends how wild. If you're just missing by a bit, it's not quite as bad. But when you can't find the strike zone for an extended stretch, that's uncomfortable. And I guess walking guys with the bases loaded, that becomes pretty embarrassing, especially if you do it a bunch of times. It's free passes, it's free runs. You got to make them earn it at some point. So I think that would be up there. Or something like Carson Bench and having that ball go off his glove, that's pretty embarrassing. And maybe it would be worse if you were a defensive replacement. The other thing, I think Russell Carlton has studied this, and I think maybe he didn't find glaring evidence of a defensive replacement penalty within one game when you're switching from one position to another, or learning a new position, yes, but I don't know that there's quite a defensive equivalent of the pinch hitter penalty, where pinch hitters seemingly, depending on the study, hit worse, and it's hard to control for because sometimes guys are pinch hitting because they had some physical ailment or something that prevented them from starting. Maybe they're not at 100%. And there's the DH penalty, which doesn't seem to affect full-time DHs who acclimate to that role. But when you're sort of put on the spot, then it kind of balances out, because on the one hand, you were chosen to do this job, and so you must be especially well suited for it. You're a pinch runner, you're a pinch hitter, you must be a good runner or a good hitter. Or if you're a pinch pitcher, basically, right? You're a reliever. You're brought in. It's because your manager thought that you had what it took to get that job done, and then you don't. And that reflects poorly on you. But also, you were put in a tough situation, because if you're pinch hitting, you were cold and you were trying to warm up and you weren't in the game. Or if you're a reliever brought in to try to clean up someone else's mess, you didn't make that mess. So it's a bit more forgivable. So if you're a defensive replacement and you have a ball clank off your glove on an easy play, and it's a physical error, but it's almost more of a mental error if it's just a can of corn. If it's a completely routine play that anyone would make, then it's not so much a coordination issue as it is you took your eye off the ball, literally, like you were not paying attention or something. And so that's kind of on you. So defensive replacement or otherwise, if a ball just drops, it's not even like going through the 5-hole, go between your legs, go under your glove. That's bad, but there could always be bad hops, and it's hard to sort of sacrifice your body even if you're conditioned to do that as a professional player. But yeah, just kind of muffing a really easy play. Or some sort of it's Snodgrass's muff or it's Merkel's boner, like it's some huge high leverage situation and you make a mistake that is more of an issue of lack of game awareness or something. Or, there's always overthrowing the cutoff man, throwing to the wrong base. That's kind of in the mold of the forgetting how many outs there are.
Oh, forgetting how many outs there are is so much worse, though.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think that one takes the cake for me. I don't know that I'm ever more frustrated than I am when that happens. I'm like, how?
Yeah.
Half the time, too. And it's like, if it's on, I'm like, your catcher is often being like, hey, there are two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The one that we talked about recently where Henry Davis ended the string of 7 consecutive walks by Reds pitchers, and he was up 2-0 and then grounded out on a pitch that if you're Henry Davis in that situation, you probably shouldn't be swinging at all. Right. That's up there, I guess, because, it has to be a combination of the physical mistake of mishitting a ball, but also just the decision to swing in the first place when your bat probably should have been on your shoulder.
Right. Make him throw you a strike. Make him throw you a strike. Don't get thrown out on the base paths. Remember how many outs there are,
The fundamentals, the little league stuff.
The fundamentals.
Yeah. And I know it's harder in practice at major league game speed than it is when you're sitting on the couch and saying, I learned that play in Little League. But nonetheless, if you are actually in the big leagues, you should be up to that speed. So, okay, those are some candidates. Please feel free to write in to suggest others that we may have overlooked. The most embarrassing thing that could happen on a baseball field, and I guess keeping it in the realm of baseball plays, maybe. I mean,
if your pants split, that's the most embarrassing thing that can happen on a baseball field.
Yes, if you have some sort of accident.
That's embarrassing if you're on a city bus also,
Yeah. So we're talking about actual baseball action, not some misfortune that befell you while you happened to be playing baseball. Okay. All right. We'll settle that once and for all. Also, here is a great disappointment to me. So we mentioned Carlos Cortez last week of the A's because he's off to a fantastic start. He was one of the hitters who had most exceeded his WAR pace when we checked in after the first quarter of the regular season. And that is still true. He has a 165 WRC plus, not too shabby. But he also made his major league debut as a pitcher. He did some mop-up duty on Sunday. And this was exciting to me when I saw that it was happening because Carlos Cortez is a switch thrower. He is ambidextrous. And he made some history, as we mentioned previously last year. Typically what he does, he plays right field or outfield left-handed, and then he plays infield, third base, right-handed. And he did both of these things in one game last year. And it was at least the first documented case of a position player entering a game throwing with one hand and then switching their throwing hand and position later in the same game. So there aren't a lot of officially listed switch throwers out there. There's Cortez, there's Anthony Siegler, but he hasn't played those same positions. So this was exciting to me because we have seen him be ambidextrous and demonstrate his ambidexterity in a single game. And here he was on the mound. And so I was thinking, well, he's going to do the Pat Venditti. He's going to be a switch pitcher on the mound because why wouldn't you if you were Carlos Cortez? And to my great disappointment, he didn't. And he threw left-handed and he just, lefty in the outfield, righty in the infield, lefty on the mound. which I guess makes sense if you had to pick a side, but he didn't. In theory, he could have alternated, and he didn't. And so when you go to the MLB.com play log for this, it knows, I suppose, that he is officially a switch thrower. And so the play log says before every plate appearance, Carlos Cortez is now pitching left-handed. Yeah, because it's like the Pat Venditti rule. Like, you have to declare which side you're going to, otherwise you end up in the silly dance where, especially if a switch hitter is up and you're just switching sides ad nauseum. So I guess they considered it as him declaring himself anew as a left-handed pitcher with every plate appearance when he was throwing as a lefty. But he did that for the entire outing, which was disappointing to me. And ultimately, he threw a scoreless inning, so it didn't really come back to bite him. But he did get touched up a little. There was a little traffic. He walked Daniel Susac, and he gave up a double to Matt Chapman, both right-handed batters who had the platoon advantage against the lefty Carlos Cortez. So even though he limited the damage and stranded the runners, perhaps he would have fared even better had he been alternating. So yeah. I can only assume that he didn't alternate because maybe he didn't have the right equipment, because what some people may not realize about Pat Venditti is that not only did he have the capacity, the ability to throw with either hand, but he also had a special glove, which looked like any other mitt from afar, but it actually had 6 fingers or 4 fingers and 2 thumbs, and then a pocket in the middle, sort of splitting the digits in half. And so he could use this on either hand. And so he could switch hands, which I'm going to guess that Carlos Cortez, as a non-pitcher, probably did not have a specially designed glove. And so that was okay when he wasn't switching positions mid-inning, and he could have one glove for the outfield and one glove for the infield. But maybe he would have needed the special Mizuno Pat Venditti model to do what Venditti did on the mound. So I don't know for sure, but that is my hypothesis about why he wasn't doing this. Or maybe he just wasn't adventurous. I don't know. Also, he was, getting it in there like mid-80s. I mean, he had some decent stuff, certainly by position player standards. I think it was some of the hardest pitches thrown this season. So maybe he's just better from that side. Maybe it's like a Gerangelo Senja sort of situation where he is ambidextrous, but he throws much harder from one.
From the one than the other. That would be my guess, but also like we're into like the third order level, like ambidextrous application, right?
I mean, he must, if he's able to play right field and third base and can do one or the other with either hand, like those are both positions that require one to have a strong arm. So he must have 2 fairly strong arms. But maybe he has more aptitude for pitching with one or the other, because he is a natural lefty. He learned later to throw righty. But I hope that someone special delivers a special mitt for Carlos Cortez so that if he's ever in a mop-up man role again, he is able to show off the fully operational Carlos Cortez experience. Because come on, we were cheated.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like it's just go buy one glove, How much could it cost?
Yeah, come on. I know it's, a special design and probably not something you can just walk into a store and buy off the rack, but he's a big leaguer, Yeah. The innovation has been made. The technology has been perfected in the past. It can be rebuilt. It can be replicated. So I hope he looks into it now that he is a professional pitcher. Also, some news for Meg's Mariners. We have a prospect call up. Cold Emerson, consensus top 10 prospect in baseball. Mariners top prospect, extended this spring, was promoted to the majors, made his debut on Sunday. So that's exciting. 20 years old, right? Youngest Mariner promoted since King Felix. Good company. So tell me about the arrival of Cold Emerson.
Well, Ben, how close of attention have you been paying to the Mariners last week? Look, They had to do this because Brendan Donovan went on the IL again.
Yeah.
And they were a little stretched. And it was one of those call-ups where he was not initially in the lineup for Sunday's game, which I mentioned mostly to illustrate how, like, kind of last minute this decision ended up being. But luckily, you know, Tacoma's just down the way.
Yep.
And as bad as I-5 traffic can be, not an impediment to him actually getting up there. I think that were it not for the injury to Donovan, that he would still be in Tacoma. He's striking out like 27% of the time. And I think Colt Emerson's going to be fine. I think that Colt Emerson will be a good big leaguer. He went 0 for 2 with a walk. He did score a run in Sunday's game. A game they lost 8-3. That's not the best. I don't think that there was anything that I saw in his debut that made me think differently of him as a player. But I do think that, you know, they're kind of in a bad way right now. And it doesn't feel amazing when injury necessitates a high-profile prospect being promoted rather than like, hey, this guy's, you know, busting down the door. But I don't want to sound like he's 20. It's exciting. Like he's going to be a good player, I think. And here he is. So nice to debut in the Steelheads uniforms because they're just so sharp. They just look slick. But it's hard to get super amped about it when it comes in like a bad loss and they look sort of rudderless. You know, it's like, can you also turn into a high-powered reliever while you're up there, Colt? Like, do you have that? You know, we're talking about guys coming in fun and interesting ways, you know? Do you throw 100 by any chance? And like, you want to help to solidify that bullpen? But yeah, he is up. I will be curious to see how long he is up. And I imagine that the way Colt Emerson plays will have a lot to say about that. But they're pretty banged up right now. You know, we didn't talk about how Cal's on the IL for the first time in his big league career. Donovan's hurt again. They have a number of injuries on the pitching side. So it doesn't matter in an AL West where like one team is exactly 500. Maybe not, but they kind of need to make some moves here. You don't want to, I mean, like I was giving you guff saying you got to you got to update your priors on the A's leading the division at 500.
Oh yeah. Yes. This NL Central has no losing teams. AL West has no winning teams situation has persisted for an improbably long time.
Here are the position players currently on the injured list for the Seattle Mariners. Cal Raleigh, Will Wilson, that's less of a big deal. Brendan Donovan, Mastroboni, who I don't think is on the 40, but Patrick Wisdom, Victor Robles, and then they have both Brash and Spire on the IL on the pitching side. So that's not great.
Yeah. I wonder what percentage of top prospect promotions are precipitated by an injury. Yeah, at least partly by injury. Right. Of course, there are plenty of top prospects who make their debut on opening day. They break camp with the big club. I guess there could be injuries involved even in some of those situations. But especially with the midseason call-ups, often there's some sort of injury at play. I guess when Connor Griffin came up, I guess it wasn't really sparked by an injury. Jared Triolo got hurt. It was
sort of injury and sort of like, whoa, we have good pitching. And remember how the offense isn't as good as it could be?
Yeah. I forget the sequence. I think Triolo might have gotten hurt immediately after that. Obviously, he wasn't a great bat to begin with. Or Travis Bazzana, for instance. He was brought up after Gabriel Arias got hurt, and then they had to move Brian Rocchio, and then Juan Brito wasn't hitting. So it was a combination of an injury absence, creating a vacancy, and then someone else not doing an adequate job filling that vacancy, and then you call up the top prospects. So I wonder, obviously there always has to be some sort of hole to fill because there are many instances where a good prospect is just blocked by a better player at the same position for a stretch. But I wonder how often it's totally just taking someone's job, just someone plays their way out of a starting spot and the prospect played his way into a promotion versus someone goes down, someone gets hurt and gets pipped pretty much, but like legitimately gets hurt, and then their spot is stolen by the hotshot prospect who comes up. So when Donovan comes back, then I guess it depends on how Emerson plays in the meantime, but he is the shortstop of the future, right? And so you have J.P. Crawford, who is hitting well, but continues to field like maybe someone who should be DHing or preferably playing a corner or something, right? So if Emerson hits well, which is obviously an open question, is there any way that Crawford could be displaced in the short term, that Emerson could stay up, or does his continued residence on the roster depend on somebody being hurt?
I don't think you want him up there if he's not playing every day.
Yeah.
He's such a young guy that having, reps at a high level on a consistent basis, I think is just obviously going to be to his benefit. And, he played 34 games at AA last year and 6 games at AAA. It's not like he has a ton of high minors experience where it's like, okay, well, just let's throw him out there and see what he can do against big league pitching. Let's see if he can figure out how to deal with that high fastball. He's 20 and he's played 44 games at AAA, So I think you want him getting consistent reps. Now, if Donovan is hurt in a way that stretches, then, maybe this resolves itself. I don't know what they're going to do about JP. He's in the last year of his deal. He is hitting well, so you want the bat in the lineup. They have a number of guys who they'd be better off DHing, but here we are. So it's like, what are you going to do there? You have 2 guys coming back from injury who you're presumably going to cycle through the DH spot a little bit as they're coming back to sort of ease their transition back into hitting. And you want them hitting every day, but maybe you want to give Cal more time off his feet when he returns. You want to give Donovan more reps at DH. So they have a little bit of a roster puzzle to sort out, and I don't quite know how they'll play it. But they definitely want Emerson playing every day.
Well, they have added a Colt to a collection of Coles that they already had. So this is exciting. Yeah.
Many young guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And speaking of Pirates promotions, there was some buzz that the Password could be on his way to the big leagues, potentially. Ostinson Garcia, who is probably a bigger prospect because of his nickname at this point than his performance, although he was formerly a higher rated prospect and remains a prospect, but I think is better known than his pure performance would warrant because of the unusual spelling of his name and the nickname that has resulted. But he's been doing well after initial slow start to the season. And he may come up to provide further reinforcement for a Pirates team that is off to a strong start. So, okay, here is a question. Well, this will perhaps touch on the Pirates. This will certainly touch on the Mariners again. But last week...
I sound so excited to talk about them, don't I?
When we talked about players who were over or underperforming their preseason projections through the first quarter of the season, this is kind of the team equivalent. And obviously we've touched on some teams that are doing better or worse than expected. But I looked up, now we're almost 30% of the way through the season, and I compared the pace that teams are playing at, just extrapolating their winning percentage over a full season, to their preseason projected win total, according to the FanGraphs playoff odds page. And I just looked to see who is pacing furthest ahead of or behind their preseason projection. And there are several teams that are about 15 full season wins or more ahead of their pace, and several teams that are 15 or more full season wins behind their preseason projected pace. And I thought I'd just throw them out to you and see if you're a believer in any of them. Which surprise team do you most believe in? And I guess that could be maybe the team that is playing better than forecasted. Which one do you like or has changed your mind the most? And then of the teams that are scuffling and struggling and suffering, which of them maybe do you believe will rebound, whether or not they fire their manager and hire Don Mattingly? So, okay, maybe we can start with the teams that are playing most over their heads from a preseason projection standpoint. We have the Tampa Bay Rays, who are sitting pretty in first place in the AL East. They were projected for 79.7 wins, and they are on pace for 108. So that is a difference of 28.3. And again, this is not looking at their full season projected win total. This is just looking at what they are on pace for, given how they have played thus far. So 28.3 wins ahead of their preseason pace. Then we have the Braves, who are 20.7 wins ahead of their 89.6 win preseason projection. Then we have the St. Louis Cardinals, who were projected to be mediocre, 75.4 wins, and are on pace for 95.1. So they're 19.7 wins ahead of their pace. Then the San Diego Padres, who had an 80.6 win projection. They're 18 wins ahead of that. And the Chicago White Sox, who projected for 67.4 wins and are 17.1 ahead of that pace. So those are the 5 teams that are 15 or more wins ahead of their pace if they were to continue playing at this pace relative to their preseason projections. And then just missing that cutoff, you have the other Chicago team, the Cubs, who are right at 15 wins above, or 15.2 to be precise. And one of their rivals in a robust NL Central, the Milwaukee Brewers, who were 12.7 wins ahead. What else is new? The Brewers surpassing projections. Who knew?
What?
Speaking of, next up on the list, the Cleveland Guardians, who were 11.8 wins ahead of their projection. And then the only other team in double digits, not a good team, but not a terrible team, which they were projected to be, the Washington Nationals, who are 11 wins ahead of the pace. So the big 5, Rays, Braves, Cardinals, Padres, White Sox. Is there one of those that has impressed you or changed your mind the most and converted you into a bigger believer than you were?
Well, we've already talked about the Braves and my skepticism of them coming into the season. I think I have to lead with them in part because a good bit of their current success is being driven by offensive returns to form, but forms that we have seen previously. So that makes me more confident in them. I still worry about their ability to sustain on the pitching side, but maybe they'll keep getting guys back and maybe it'll be okay. It could be okay. They've got a reasonable cushion. So that's impressive, and Sale is, he's having a great season. Is there a gap between his ERA and his FIP? Yeah, but it's not like the FIP is bad.
And I'll say this about the Braves. They are the only one of these teams that is not overperforming its base runs record. The Braves' actual record as we speak is 32-15. Their base runs record, identical, 32-15. So they have pretty much played. I mean, their run differential is about 20 runs higher than it quote unquote should be. Their base runs deserved run differential. But basically, if you strip out some of the luck and fluctuations, the Braves have had an under the hood performance that mirrors their record. So that is pretty impressive given what their record is.
Yeah. And, as I said, and have said before, part of the disconnect for me with them is that I just anticipated them being much worse than they have been because I thought they were too injured on the pitching side. And it's been fine,
Yeah, I was very optimistic about the Braves at the start of spring training.
Right.
And then by the end of spring training,
it's half their rotations on the injured list.
And Profire was suspended and everything seemed to go wrong. And it seemed as if history from last season was repeating itself.
Right. But they have been stout enough in the rotation. Part of it, too, is that they've gotten really great performances so far from the guys at the back of their bullpen. So, they've been kind of able to paper over some of that stuff to the extent that there was an issue before. It's like, well, when you have Suarez and Iglesias and they're pitching the way they are, like, you can kind of get away with a good amount of stuff and nonsense. Fuentes has been fine for them in relief. And so I think that I was more down on their pitching than I necessarily needed to be. And part of it too is that like, I didn't know what to make of some of the declines that they had seen in their hitters, especially some of those guys have aged. And, a lot of their hitting looks really strong, and gosh, Drake Baldwin's fun. So I just think that they're a more complete all-around team than I was necessarily giving them credit for. Ha-Seong Kim is back. So like they I think have managed to build this really nice lead in the division, which isn't to say that they can rest on their laurels because, we have the Phillies and the Mets sort of playing more like themselves lately. But I think that they're the most impressive of this group. The Rays, I don't know what to make of the Rays. I mean, the Rays they're 30-15. Their Pythagorean record is 25-20. They're 24-21 by base runs. So they're obviously outperforming. Their pitching has been more stout than I was necessarily expecting it to be, but I felt like they had space for sort of positive variance there just because of they're getting guys back from injury and you don't know what you're going to get with that. And like, is Griffin Jax a starter? I don't know. Do I expect them to be this good? I certainly didn't expect them to be the best team in the AL East on May 18th. Ben, no, I didn't expect that.
Yeah, it's not as if they were completely written off as being competitive, but they were no one's pick to win that division, or very few people's at least. And yeah, I figured maybe they could stay in it. I didn't think they would be bad, but yeah, I did not expect that they would be sailing along like this. And I think part of it is that, well, it's just the general anonymity of their roster, which is nothing new for the Rays, really, but certainly from a mainstream perspective, they just have so much roster churn and turnover. And this offseason was kind of classic Rays. They just made a zillion moves, and it was hard to tell what it all amounted to. And did they actually get better? I don't know. And can you count on anyone actually being here for very long? And I think, yeah, they've been a little lucky, and Joe Sheehan wrote about them a few days ago, and he always breaks it down in terms of what he calls 1X or 1/X games, which is like not just your one-run game record, but also extra innings. Because in extra innings, sometimes with the zombie runner, you end up winning or losing by a lot of runs. But obviously it was close. It was tied after 9. So it was kind of a close game until they switched the rules around on you. So if you just look at how they had done in those games and not double counting the one-run games that are also the extra inning games, they were, as of a few days ago, 10-2 in those games. And they'd done it with a pretty bad bullpen so far, which we're not really accustomed to seeing from the Rays. So as Joe noted, it's kind of a weird... It's a weird
mix of things. But like McClanahan's been good and effective. Yeah. And Nick Martinez looks like a good pickup for them, right? Mm-hmm. And Rasmussen's been pretty okay. So it's like there are parts of it that are working well. And there are parts of it that you wouldn't expect to be quite so good, but like Yandy Diaz is having a great start to the season, and Aranda's been good, and Caminero's been good, and they're getting like okay performance out of Ryan Velotti, and like so it's like they're raising it in an interesting way. But you're right that like you expect there to be sort of a shutdown set of arms at the back of that bullpen, and they haven't really had that yet. But like they're hitting well enough in other parts of their lineup, and they're getting okay production out of their starters. And so, like they seem like a team that's probably 5 or 6 wins above what you would expect from their underlying statistics. But also, being able to be competitive in that division at this juncture, I think goes a long way because, Do I think they're better than the Yankees? I absolutely do not think that to be true. I don't think they're better than the Blue Jays, but I also think that those ones are banked. So, who cares?
It's funny. Rasmussen, I've seen a lot of fun facts going around where people try to stump other people because Drew Rasmussen is on the list of lowest ERAs over however many seasons, minimum however many innings. He has a career 2.78 ERA as a Tampa Bay Ray, and this is his 6th season with them. So he's been quite good at run suppression for some time. He has a 3.19 ERA this year, and that's his highest as a Ray. So he just doesn't give up runs, but no one really knows because he's been hurt a bunch. And even when he's not hurt, he doesn't go deep into games. So his single season high is 150 innings. And, he's kind of been a swingman at certain points. You never know who's going to be in the Rays rotation or relieving for the Rays. Griffin Jacks, sure. Why don't you start? We're shorthanded here. Why not? So Rasmussen is pretty impressive on a per inning basis, and he's done that for quite a while now. And so they're this weird team. They have an effective rotation, but a rotation that doesn't go deep into games, which is kind of classic Rays and also the personnel that they have. And then usually they really ride the bullpen hard, but the bullpen has been bad. And then they have a really good outfield defense, but a really bad infield defense.
Yeah.
They have some mashers who just are basically DH quality fielders like Caminero and Aranda. And, you only get Diaz and you only get one DH. Yeah. So the others have to play somewhere. So yeah, it's sort of a strange team. And whenever you see the Rays exceeding expectations, I think you're always inclined to just say, oh, it's the Rays.
Right.
They've figured it out. They're doing something, right? They've hit on something that no one else has and everyone will be copying in a couple years. So I don't know. I think they're not this good, but maybe they were underrated a bit just because they just don't have a ton of continuity or big names. But yeah, it's an awkward, inelegantly constructed roster, maybe.
Yeah.
And yet the sum of the parts, not a bad team. So coupled with disappointing starts from Toronto and certainly Boston and Baltimore for that matter, they're can't really say running away with this thing, but yeah, they're in a nice spot right now and certainly in good playoff position one way or another.
Yeah, and then it's you look at some of the other teams you mentioned, I think that the White Sox they're performing in a way that is respectable. You know what I mean? Do I think that they're necessarily a playoff team? No, because I don't know that Murakami's going to maintain this level of home run rate, but I mean, they're a better club than I thought they were. The pitching's not very good. The pitching remains not very good.
The White Sox are fun. I mean,
they're fun.
Yeah, and we talked about this with James on the preview.
Right.
They were feisty. They were frisky. They had a lot of good, exciting young players. They'd clearly turned a corner. You could see the light at the end of the tunnel, and then they have some really interesting players. I was excited to see. Could Colson Montgomery keep that up? Yeah, I guess so. Sure looks like it. Could Murakami hit? Sure looks like it. And then you've got Miguel Vargas hitting as well as he has. They just, yeah, I agree with you. It's a little light. It's a little thin, but it's coming together,
Yeah.
and putting that together with some prospects who are waiting in the wings.
Right.
I'm pretty high on the White Sox in the medium term. This might be one of those seasons where they're sort of, at least a year ahead of schedule.
Sure.
I know it's odd to say that about the White Sox because in a way they're 3 years behind schedule and also a year ahead of schedule maybe. But yeah, they're constructing a core here. Yeah. And it's a watchable team.
It's a watchable team.
It's the AL Central. So that has a way of maybe moving up the timeline a little bit, especially with the Tigers struggling, which we will mention in a moment, and Tarek Skubal hurt and everything. Am I going to completely count out the White Sox keeping pace with the other teams in this division, making it interesting, making a real run? No, I'm not. Ultimately, they probably don't have what it will take this season, but yeah, I mean, 24-22. Do I think that they're that much worse than a 500 team at this stage? I don't know. Maybe that's kind of who they are. Like they're 7 runs in the red, run differential wise. So they're a couple wins above their base runs record, but not by a lot. It's not a complete mirage.
Again, it's a respectable club. They're giving people, they're giving people a reason to watch them. And it's not just Murakami. I mean, Murakami does help a good bit, to be clear.
Catch the Davis Martin mania. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Catch the fever.
Yep.
Yeah. It's exciting. He's pretty good.
And then we have the Padres and the Cardinals. Now, the Cardinals, I had next to no expectations for.
Right.
And they entered this season as much a non-entity as the Cardinals have been in the past couple decades. They just seemed like a non-factor. And it seemed like a positive sign that they had really committed to the rebuild, and that you could kind of forecast, okay, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, they might have the makings of something here, and this will be an important year for them to figure out what they've got and who's worth keeping around. But for them to get off to a start like this after shipping out Gray and Contreras and Donovan and all the rest, just like kind of moving on from all those veterans, like this is pretty darn impressive that they get off to a 27-19 start after that.
Yeah, I think that, we've spent a good amount of time sort of contemplating Jordan Walker's re-breakout, reintroduction, ascent, whatever you want to call it. And there have been a number of impressive rookie performances this year. And I think because the expectations of the Cardinals were low, like the way that JJ Weatherholt is playing is getting lost in the rookie shuffle a little bit. But like he's a 119 WRC plus. He's playing good defense. Yeah. He has 8 home runs. So I think that they are getting contributions from both ends of the expected sort of competitive window, right? Like where you could imagine a version of Jordan Walker who kind of continues to flounder and is part of the next group that's good, but isn't viewed as sort of a core piece of that. But, if he's able to sustain this, like, I think we have to reevaluate him. It hasn't gone well with everyone that they were trying to like figure out this year, right? Like Nolan Garman has a 93 WRC plus. So, not everyone who they were sort of using this year to reassess and sort of understand better has necessarily been great. But, they're a respectable club. And as you've kind of joked, like that's not a gimme division right now. So the fact that they're playing this well, given the rest of the competition that they're facing in that division, like that's not nothing.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, they do have these still kind of confounding guys like Gorman, Lars Nootbaar, but they also have, I guess, Alec Burleson's, he's hitting pretty well, but they have like Victor Scott II. Good glove, not hitting at all. So that's sort of disconcerting. Yeah. But when you have Jordan Walker doing what he's doing, and you have Ivan Herrera, who's not only hitting as usual, but also has returned to catching more regularly, which is pretty exciting for me personally. But that plus Weatherholt, plus Mason Wynn, and Burleson, like you start to look around and, okay, you've got the makings of something here. And I was talking about Riley O'Brien as a potential trade piece the other day. Well, not if they keep playing like this. He's older than the rest of those guys, but he's also team controlled for a while. And if they think that they might actually be good sometime soon, then maybe you want to hang on to him. So, yeah, it hasn't worked out for everyone, obviously. I mean, there's Victor Scott, there's Pedro Pajes, there's Matthew Liberatore. Like some guys aren't really breaking through the way that they had hoped, but this is encouraging, not even just because of the record.
McGreevy's been pretty good.
Yeah, and I guess the record goes hand in hand with the fact that some of these players are playing well. But even if you took away the record somehow and you just had a lackluster record with these individual successes, that alone, I think, would be more than most people expected from this club. So if they could actually stay in this thing and make this season interesting from a competitive playoff race standpoint, while also shoring up hopes for future seasons, well, yeah, that's a big win.
Yeah. And, I think that when we talked through their rebuild or step back or whatever, it's not a step back. They dealt too many guys for us to use that kind of cutesy terminology. But it was clear that like they want to be good reasonably soon. I think their expectations of it are, not that it would necessarily happen this year, but part of why I think they took the approach they did to some of the deals that they did, where they were getting a mix of guys who, were likely to be big league ready soon and guys who were further away, is to give themselves the opportunity to have sort of this like, I've already used the term positive variance, but positive variance, right? Where maybe you have a couple guys pop, you use the year to evaluate in a real way the dudes who are on your roster who are sort of in between cases, figure out which of them are going to be important for you going forward. Now, their biggest challenge as an organization, the thing they have to figure out is like, how do they develop this pitching? How do they develop the guys, both who are in the system already and who they've recently either drafted or acquired? And, some of the early returns on those guys aren't the most outstanding, right? Like Liam Doyle has an ERA of 6.04, but he has a 3.71 FIP at AA, so maybe it'll be okay. You know what I mean? Like they still have to solve that piece of it, but they have time to do that, because I don't think that this should meaningfully adjust anyone's expectations in terms of when they're going to be good and competitive again. The nice bonus for Cardinals fans is like, hey, you're going to watch a more entertaining brand of baseball this year than you were reasonably going to expect. But like, let's imagine for a second that they are able to sustain this. They become a playoff team. Like, what are we really talking about there, right? Like you're going to throw this rotation in a playoff series? Like, I don't know about that. That seems, Game 1 starter Michael McGreevy. Feel good about that? You want Dustin May in your playoff rotation? So like there are obvious limitations to this group in terms of not only their ability to sustain and make it to October, but then perform there. But it has to be encouraging and answering for yourself as an organization, which of these dudes are dudes for us? In a year when you don't expect to compete, to your point, like that's a year well spent. If you come away with answers on those players and you are giving opportunities to young guys to get run where it makes sense, like that's a good use of the year. Hey, guess what? We were right. JJ Weatherholt is good.
Yeah. Okay. And so from a base runs perspective, the Rays are 6 runs over. The Cardinals are 4 wins over, not runs, wins, whole wins,
right?
Times it by 10. And then the Padres are 5 wins above their base runs record. And this is with Fernando Tatis Jr. remaining the hardest hitting homerless hitter.
It's bananas.
It's wild.
It's really something.
It's not as if that many Padres are having standout seasons.
No,
Mason
the
Miller
offense
is leading the team with 1.4 WAR.
Yeah, the offense is pretty lackluster just across the board. It's been a tough go for their offense. Really not the best.
Yeah. Now Michael King has looked good and has been on the mound, which was kind of the key for him. Right. So that's looking like it was a smart signing. Maybe some other teams were scared off. But yeah, you know, they've been kind of patching together a rotation, and you look at just the individual stats and you kind of wonder how they're making it this competitive.
Yeah.
Because, the Dodgers have had their issues with health and hitting and everything lately. But the Padres are half a game back, and equal in the loss column as we speak. So they're running neck and neck with LA.
They only have one qualified hitter with the WRC plus above 100, and that's Xander Bogaerts, who's having quite a resurgent season. Like, way to go, Xander Bogaerts. You're having a great time. But, like, their leader from a WRC plus perspective is Gavin Sheets.
Yeah.
And, he's, not so far off the qualified pace, but, he has a 152 WRC plus. Miguel Andujar has a 124. But they're big boppers, like Machado, Tatis, and Jackson Merrill all have WRC pluses in the low 70s. Jake Cronenworth, my God, dude, like what's going on with you? So it's a weird it's a weird group because on the one hand, they feel like a team that should be hitting much better than they are, but they're also winning. So I don't know what to make of them other than this is strange. And hopefully you get some sort of a course correction from guys like Machado and Merrill and Tatis. And then, well, hey, again, you've banked wins. You've kept yourself within striking distance of the Dodgers while you're trying to figure this stuff out. But I don't. Yeah. Ben?
When are the Padres not having some sort of strange season? This is strange in a good way this year, at least.
Yeah, but very odd org some of the time, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's A.J. Preller's team, so that makes some sense. Plus, they're in the midst of being sold. I mean, what a weird year. And one cautionary note on the Rays that Joe Sheehan mentioned, even though we're talking about how they're exceeding expectations, they do have very flat swings and they don't walk a lot. They don't hit for a lot of power. They have kind of Joe made the comp to a 2010s Royals or 2020s Guardians or recent Brewers sort of offense where you wonder how it works and it's kind of contact and average and speed and all the rest of it. And there's at least some evidence that maybe that doesn't hold up super well in the playoffs should they get there. Yeah. Because even though contact guys, they might lose a little less proportionately speaking against high velocity, at least according to something I wrote years ago. But they have sort of a long sequence offense, as Joe puts it, like you just have to string together a bunch of hits because they're not walking that much and they don't have a whole lot of big boppers. And so sometimes that doesn't go so great in the postseason when you're facing great defenses and great pitchers and hits are hard to come by and you kind of hope for the 3-run homer and maybe they're not the best equipped to provide it. But just to get there would, I think, exceed most people's preseason expectations.
Yes.
Okay. And then of the teams bringing up the rear here on this list, the teams that are tracking to be 15 or more wins worse than what they were projected for preseason, well, you have the Mets. Who else? Right. Who are at negative 19.5 relative to the preseason total. And then who else? The Red Sox. Negative 18.1, even though those two teams have course corrected somewhat. Mm-hmm. They are still well behind where they were supposed to be. And then the Angels, who have had it rough lately and also long-term. They're at negative 16.9, really over any frame of reference or span of time. They've had it rough. 16.9 wins below where they were supposed to be, and they weren't supposed to be good to begin with. And then the Astros, we've talked a bit about all their injuries and where they will go from here. They're 16.2 wins behind the pace. And then the Tigers at 15.2. And your Mariners just spared from clearing that 15 win above or behind bar there at negative 14.1. And then the other teams in double digits, the Giants, negative 13, the Royals, negative 12.8. So the big losers there, Mets, Red Sox, Angels, Astros. You could throw in the Tigers if you care to. I guess I could say, are there any that you really believe are just genuinely bad? Are you a believer in their surprise suckage? But I was going to frame it more in terms of, do you believe that they could bounce back? Do you see some of these teams as being better than their record so far would suggest?
What are my options again?
Mets, Red Sox, and we've talked about those teams plenty. Yeah. Angels, Astros, Tigers, Mariners, if you want to include them.
I think that the Tigers and the Mariners and the Mets and the Red Sox are better than their records. Whether they'll be able to bounce back, I don't know. I think that the Tigers and the Mariners will have an easier time of it just based on the competition that they face in their division, which doesn't mean that it'll be enough. But I think the Astros are a bad baseball team. Generally, like they seem like a pretty bad baseball team. You know how I know that they're not a good baseball team? They mostly made the Mariners look pretty good when the Mariners. So that's always a sign. That's always a little indicator. And then the Angels are bad, but we kind of knew that. And I don't think that the expectations of the Astros were particularly high, even with their underperformance. Like it just seemed like we're in a period of slow swoon.
Yes.
And it just becomes a matter of like how aggressive does the team want to be in pursuing a rebuild. I don't know how bad you have to be. How bad? Well, I'll put this question to you so that you have to contemplate it for our listeners. How bad did the Astros have to be to entertain trading Jordan?
About this bad, probably. I think, you always want to embark on the rebuild. I'd rather do it too soon than too late. That was something that Branch Rickey was famed for, where he would just anticipate when he would have to move someone. And the whole I could finish last without you that is attributed to him. But yeah, the Astros just fit that mold of kind of like the post-championship Phillies, where they tried to keep it going. You run into trouble sometimes when you say, we'll run it back. We'll cling to this core. We'll keep trying to patch over these flaws and we'll make one more run at it. And then the stalwarts just get older and older. And if you don't have that pipeline, which they had for so long, which was supplying new talent to the team, then it just gets harder and harder and the tires get more and more threadbare. And sometimes if you pull the trigger on the trades a year too late, then you're dooming yourself to maybe a few down years, right? It can really be, if you do it, you'd rather be too early. And not that, in this era, in this environment where you don't actually have to be that good to make the playoffs, then there's always the argument for, well, could we maybe make this work and squeak into the playoffs and make a run? And that's defensible too. And sometimes we give teams a hard time when it seems like they don't really have a championship caliber team, but they might have a wild card winner. And in baseball, if you're a wild card winner, well, you could be championship caliber because the playoffs are pretty random. So yeah, it's hard to pull the plug, I think, especially these days. So I sort of don't fault them for trying because they were so close last year, despite having a huge injury stack. And so they could have talked themselves into, okay, we'll have better health this year and it will be better. And then they really haven't had better health. And you don't really expect better health as you get older. So yeah, there's still some pretty enticing players on that team. And so if they were to really strip it down, and I'm not saying old school Jeff Lunau sort of strip it down, but a standard rebuild for this era, then yeah, they would certainly have some takers and someone like Jordan, as good as he is, but even their quote unquote young guys aren't that young, like Jordan or Jeremy Pena. And then if you have someone like Jordan, who's obviously defensively limited and has an injury history and everything else, and even now when he's healthy, he can still be an impact player as a DH because he might be like the best hitter in baseball. But anything short of that or less availability, then it's tough to construct a team on that foundation.
Right. And you have guys like Christian Walker, who has had a nice little bounce back from his first year in Houston, which was terrible. But, he's 35. Like, do you really want to? But I'm just saying, like, there are ways in which their ability to capitalize on Jordan might be limited by the fact that he does come with pretty pronounced injury risk, but you also he's not a free agent until 2029. Now, if you think that next year is going to be a truncated season, like, does that alter the way you think about how much time you have with him? So, like, I'm sure that'll play, but he would easily be one of the most desirable trade targets on the market. I know we're not talking about the deadline. I'm breaking my own rule, but I'm just saying, like, they're a bad club and they're going to have to answer this question for themselves in the coming month, probably.
Yeah, I would be open for business.
Yeah, and it's too bad for them because, like, they've actually been hitting well. Like, the offense hasn't been the problem. Their pitching has just been garbo. I also worry that the Mariners are, like, psychologically damaging Imai all on their own because he was their first team back after coming off the AL, and it didn't go great, Ben. It didn't. So there's that. The Angels are the Angels. We'll entertain the Trout trade conversation again at some point, I'm sure. They are pretty bad. I think they're just a bad club, and they are mired. They are mired in the suck, as it were.
Okay. All right, a few closing corrections. On our last episode, I referred to the fact that Jonah Heim started the season with the Braves, but is no longer employed by that team. However, I still misteamed him. As Discord group user Mulder Batflip pointed out, I said he was on the Rangers, but no, he's on the A's. Of course, Heim had been on the Rangers. He was on the Rangers last year and for some years before that. And before he was a Ranger, he was on the A's for the first time. So this is his second go-around with the A's. I can't keep track of where Jonah Heim plays. Where in the world is Jonah Heim? Well, for now, he's in West Sacramento, at least when the A's are. Another mea culpa, I promulgated an outdated description of DRS methodology, and I heard straight from the source, Alex Vigderman, listener, Patreon supporter, and vice president of analytics at Sports Info Solutions, which publishes DRS. Alex says, I was listening to episode 2479 and wanted to hopefully clear things up a bit about the methodological differences between OAA/FRV, that's the StatCast-based outs above average or fielding run value, and DRS. At this point, both systems handle positioning similarly. Ben recalled correctly that this was a discrepancy between team-facing and public-facing DRS. There are still some methodology differences, but public DRS has taken positioning into account for infielders going back to 2013, implemented in 2020, and for outfielders going back to 2021, implemented in 2021. So both systems do take into account the starting point on any particular play. Alex says, interestingly, my colleague Mark Simon and I were just discussing an MLB.com article detailing Rays shortstop Taylor Walls' ability to position himself perfectly. That article also posited that StatCast accounts for Walls' positioning better than DRS. StatCast and SIS theoretically use the same moment in time, the pitch release, to judge where a player is positioned, but we come to different conclusions about Walls' positioning prowess. So there's something to dig into there. You can actually find the positioning value we carve out for teams on FanGraphs, and I will link to that. It's on the leaderboards on the fielding team stats page. Alex says it's named a bit funkily because the abbreviation RTS comes from Team Shift Run Saved, which is what we used to call this concept before the updated system. And the leader this year? Taylor Walls' Rays. Let me know if there's anything else that would be helpful to clarify. As you can tell from the fact that this has come up twice in a week, the word hasn't exactly gotten out as well as we'd like. Well, here I am helping to spread the word, the correct, accurate word this time. And I did ask Alex whether he's looked into whether there's any more of a disparity between DRS and FRV than there used to be, because I have seen some people postulate that there is. For instance, Joe Sheehan, writing last month about the Padres' defense, said, DRS hates their defense, StatCast loves it, and increasingly I don't know what to do with those splits, which seem to be more common. So I said to Alex, I don't know if there's truth to that, or if there is, what it would mean. He said, we haven't looked at that, but maybe Mark and I can get our heads together on something. The methodologies are more similar now than they were a few years ago because of the components MLB has added, so I wouldn't have expected that kind of result. But there's also some room for chaos because Baseball Reference and FanGraphs sometimes show different totals because column names or mappings have changed over time. The team DRS values are an example, where FanGraphs has a separate positioning run saved value and the total that includes that value, while Baseball Reference has a column that claims to do the same, but in fact doesn't include the positioning value. That may have been the source of my confusion. Alex says, fun, we try to address these when we find them, but we don't always find them, and we don't always coordinate as well as we could with our pals over there. So defensive stats, in principle, more similar than ever, but sometimes still different. To paraphrase the old Effectively Wild refrain, if defensive stats were different, how different would they be? And one final follow-up on that same stat blast from last time about pinch runners that we referenced earlier. The numbers I shared from Michael Mountain last time were slightly off because of the way the retrosheet data is coded. Sometimes there's a pickoff flag, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the runner was actually put out. So on something like 30% of the plays with pickoff flags, the pickoff didn't result in a putout. So the rates I cited earlier on this episode were accurate, and I will also link to an updated spreadsheet with the individual pinch runner rates, which includes everyone with at least 7 stolen base opportunities who has a higher pickoff rate than the most prolific pinch runner, Matt Alexander's 4.7%. This is, again, pickoffs over stolen base opportunities as the denominator. And Michael kept that minimum of 7 stolen base opportunities so that he could include pitchers Jack Flaherty and Tommy Hughes, not to mention, of course, dead ball era Phillies outfielder Bud Weiser. That's right. Bud Weiser. And those guys and one John Monroe, they all got picked off one time in 7 stolen base opportunities. That's a 14.3% pickoff rate. And that's the worst. If you require double-digit stolen base opportunities, then it's Bubba Thompson, who was picked off in 3 of 25. That's 12%. Matt Alexander was 16 out of 341. And Michael notes, Senators/Twins starting pitcher Pedro Ramos had 165 stolen base opportunities as a pinch runner and was picked off only once. On the other hand, he attempted only 4 stolen bases in his career and had a 50% success rate. The most stolen base opportunities for a pinch runner who was never picked off is 246 for Dick Schofield Jr. We would love it if you would support the podcast on Patreon, which you can do by going to patreon.com/effectivelywild and signing up to pledge some monthly or yearly amount to help keep the podcast going, help us stay ad-free, and get yourself access to some perks, as have the following 5 listeners: Humber Pie, not Humble, Humber, Maureen McCord, John Ellis, Dave Finnegan, and Kenneth Pershke. Thanks to all of you. Patreon perks include access to our full-length, unrestricted 3rd episode of each week, as well as a monthly bonus episode, exclusive live streams, and our Patreon Discord group. Plus, prioritized email answers, personalized messages, shout-outs at the end of episodes, FanGraphs memberships, potential podcast appearances, and more. Check out all the offerings at patreon.com/effectivelywild. If you are a Patreon supporter, you can message us through the Patreon site. If not, you can contact us via email. Send your questions, comments, intro and outro themes to podcast@fangraphs.com. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Effectively Wild on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and other podcast platforms. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/effectivelywild. You can find the Effectively Wild subreddit at r/effectivelywild. And you can check the show notes in the podcast post at FanGraphs or Patreon or the episode description in your podcast app for links to the stories and stats we cited today. Thanks to Shane McKeon for his editing and production assistance. We will be back with another episode a little later this week. Talk to you then.
How are you? I'm okay. We got so much to do today. Breaking balls and breaking snells, and those stats won't blast themselves. Effectively wild.